Ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Abruzzo, Global Yacht Exchange, the new Yacht Brokers MLS. Anyway, sorry for the cheap plug. Here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, I am flabbergasted how many people do not know how to tie their boat up properly. So we're doing a quick bit here on properly tying your boat up and storm lines done right. So, nothing irks me more than walking down the dock and I see a boat rubbing against fenders. And people think that's okay. No, it's not. Over time, the fenders will rub right through the gel coat. I call it dock rash. And it's just ridiculous to do that. Anyway, this is a absolutely tried and proven system for tying up your boat. You have both piling. This is your dock, cleat. All right, so now, so your dock lines, bow lines like that, your stern lines, your cross, and a spring line. The spring lines should be somewhere around midship. It doesn't matter if your boat cleats are here and they go there. But you should have two spring line, a spring line, one on each side, bow line, and crossed stern lines, okay? Now, a really important component of this, and I see this all day long, all your lines, if the wind's going this way, they should have an equal amount of tautness. This one, this, and this. And I see this every day. Maybe you got one line that's really tight, and these are basically have slack. That means all the load is going under one cleat. So for a day-to-day basis, when your boat's tied up, you get away with it. But when the storms come, you will not get away with it. Imagine a 50-mile-an-hour blow going this way, and the only lines you got one tight line here, and maybe this one will take some load, and the spring ain't doing nothing. Well, when you do your storm lines, on the side does not have any stress. The wind's coming this way, this one will be slack. Put a second one. And here's the point. We're going to talk about single point of failure. If you put two dock lines on one cleat, you accomplish nothing. You have a single point of failure. If that cleat goes south, you got nothing. Try really hard to put lines on different points here, because I know this is getting a little confusing, to say the least. Same deal. Spring. So now the wind's coming this way, right? Okay. This line's doing nothing. This line's doing nothing because the wind's going that way. All the stress is on this side. And what you really want to do is make sure they all have an equal amount of tautness. So when there's a load, they should all be sharing the load. And I see this over and over. So in this case, this cleat is not doing anything because the wind's coming this way. So, as a second point, tie that somewhere else, on the dock or to another piling. Same with this line is going to be slack if the wind's coming this way. So, use that cleat and tie it to something else. And in the end, you should have a half a dozen lines sharing the load. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that they're equally taut, or you're not doing anything. So I know this is pretty dim, juvenile looking. I want to talk about floating dock. All right, I see this every day. So here's the boat, and banging into the pilings. Just banging into the dock, banging into the floating dock. And I got to tell you, if a storm is coming, and you got your boat tied up this way, move the boat. If there's a hurricane, or not even a hurricane, a stiff wind coming, you know there's a storm coming, move your boat. What's absolutely insane, and I've seen this, there's a piling here, and people don't put a line. So your boat's just banging against the floating dock, which is pretty stupid. So over and over and over, I see this routine. Honestly, my boat, I wouldn't have it on a floating dock. I really wouldn't. I mean, maybe for a weekend, And if you live in a home on the water and that's the only option you have, find a way to get somebody to install 2 pilings. And then, you know, you can tie the thing up properly. Because the boat banging into the floating dock, even with a fender, it's going to get screwed up. It's a matter of when, not if. All right, I know this is a little silly to try to follow, but here it is in real world. That little boat sitting against the floating dock, the wind is pushing it against the floating dock, it's getting beat up. So, if you're in a position where you can't have pilings, this is called a helical mooring. I'm going to put the helical mooring off the port side on the bow, and then I can tie the boat up properly so it's not banging into the floating dock. I'm going to put a second one off the stern, so there's nothing to it. Okay, put it like a 4-foot pipe in here, screw it into the ground all the way down. It's said to be 10 times stronger than a traditional mooring. And now you got a place to tie the boat. And by the way, you set this up a little bit like a mooring. You put a chain to a mooring ball, and now the mooring ball is really going to be your bow line and a stern line on the port side. And it absolutely works. I've got it going on the other side. Again, if you're in that situation, your boat is tied up to a floating dock, there's nothing you can do. Get the boat out of the water when the storms are coming. I promise you, you'll be glad you did. A little common sense, but the 6-point system, I hate telling this because I just despise arrogance. It's the ugliest human trait on the planet. I'm not bragging, I'm just making a point. Because of my previous business, I bought and sold over 1,000 boats. That means I owned 1,000 boats. Not at once, obviously, over a 25-year period. I had no choice but to really learn how to tie my inventory up without getting damaged. And no bullshit, 25 years, 1,000 boats, this setup, and I dubbed it a New Jersey 6-point system, no damage in 25 years except for a few torn pieces of canvas, a few things missing that flew off. Essentially, I dodged, you know, every storm for 25 years, including Sandy. So, and by the way, a quick side note, this is a little funky. When, you know, you tie your boat up, what you should do is at dead low tide, you make all your lines taut. And then when the tide comes in, you'll be okay. If you are at high tide and you set your lines taut, when the tide goes out, your boat will be hanging from the cleats, literally. I dubbed that the cleat test. So here's where it gets a little funky. Whenever you have a really nasty storm, you get a unusually high tide, which means you have to leave extra slack. Now, in doing that, make sure the boat's not hitting anything. But you have to give it more slack than you would normally give it. Or, you know, it's just when the tide comes in and you have a tide on top of a tide, the lines will be too taut. You'll actually sink your boat. All right, so we cleaned this up a little bit because it was pretty ridiculous. Still pretty ridiculous. Anyway, just a quick recap. If you have pilings and you can set your boat up this way, there's nothing that comes close to this as far as, you know, protecting your boat. 2 bow lines, 2 spring lines, 2 stern lines that are crossed. All right, and the storm lines we went over. Now this is your boat against a floating dock. If there's pilings, use them for God's sakes. And I see people do that. The boat's banging in a floating dock, not using them. If you don't have the pilings, you don't have them. So again, my advice is if you're doing this and a storm's coming, pull the boat out of the water. Really. The helical mooring, and we're going to come back and do a whole nother quick segment on mooring, if it's interesting to you. Maybe in the comments just put, yeah, I'd like to see how to set up a mooring. But I use this mooring anchor for lines to keep the boat off the dock. And it absolutely works. So that's it, guys. Thank you for your time. Again, Charlie Abruzzo, Global Yacht Exchange, the new Yacht Brokers MLS website. Thank you for your time.